The camera footage started with the soft rustle of leaves under the moonlight. A dim glow from a nearby porch light cast long shadows across the backyard. The image was grainy but clear enough to capture the moment. A woman in leopard print leggings, hair tied tightly in a bun, tiptoed toward the fence with a pair of bright red garden shears. Her name was Karen. She paused briefly, glanced over her shoulder, then smirked. In one swift motion, she reached forward and clipped a section of the wire fence. There was a faint snap and a quiet creak as the gate she had tampered with unlatched. But what she didn't see, what the camera caught, was a dark, fur-covered figure gliding silently through the shadows behind her, slipping out of the enclosure with the grace of a phantom. Karen walked away satisfied. She had no idea she had just released a pack of rescue wolves. Hours earlier, everything had been calm. I had just finished feeding the wolves, giving them their evening dose of chicken and kibble, and checking every inch of their reinforced enclosure like I always did. Their habitat wasn't just a cage. It was a carefully constructed enclosure lined with double fences and buried steel mesh, built with my own hands and verified by the State Wildlife Board. I had been rescuing wolves for over 5 years now, starting with my first one, Ranger, a severely traumatized male I'd found abandoned in the woods, covered in scars and shaking at every noise. After Ranger came Luna, Blaze, and Shadow, each with their own story of suffering, survival, and healing. They weren't pets, they were family, and keeping them safe wasn't just my responsibility, it was my purpose. But living in this neighborhood wasn't easy. Not because of the wolves or the neighbors, it was because of the HOA, and worse than the HOA was the self-appointed queen of it all, Karen. She didn't like my house, said my fence was an eyesore, that it lowered property values. She claimed the howl of the wolves disturbed her cat. Once, she even said I was keeping dangerous animals and should be reported. I showed her the permits. I showed her the reinforced design. I even invited the HOA committee to tour the enclosure. They declined. Karen, however, never needed proof. She just needed a reason to make my life miserable. That night, while I slept, Karen made her move. With one clean snip and a few forceful tugs, she dismantled the outer latch of the fence, probably thinking she could prove the structure was unsafe. Maybe she thought letting the wolves wander a bit would scare the HOA into siding with her. But she didn't know how fast a wolf could move when it sensed freedom or danger. She didn't know that one of them, Ranger, still panicked in open spaces, still associated gates with traps. She didn't know what kind of chain reaction her little sabotage would set off. The next morning, I woke to pounding on my front door. My heart skipped. I knew that sound. It was the sound of trouble. I threw on a hoodie and ran to the door. 2 uniformed animal control officers stood there, flanked by a police cruiser. Before they even spoke, I felt the air rush out of my lungs. One of them asked if I was the owner of the wolves. I nodded. They said there had been multiple calls. People had seen large animals near the creek, near the playground, even near a school. My legs buckled slightly. I ran straight to the back. The enclosure looked intact from a distance, but when I got closer, I saw the damage. The outer latch was cut. The inner gate was half open. Claw marks near the dirt confirmed my worst fear. They had gotten out. I counted food bowls. Only Blaze and Luna were inside, pacing anxiously. Shadow was gone. Ranger was gone. I grabbed my phone and rushed back inside. I had to find them. But before I could make the first call, my phone buzzed. A message from the neighborhood group chat. Someone had posted a video. My heart stopped when I saw the thumbnail, Karen in my yard. I opened it. The video began with the timestamp 1:48 a.m. It showed Karen sneaking up to the fence. She looked both ways, then pulled out garden shears. There was no hesitation. She clipped the lock and pushed the gate. Seconds later, a low shape slipped past her legs and darted into the trees. She never even noticed. But the camera noticed. The neighborhood noticed. The chat was already exploding. Is that Karen? Did she break into your yard? Wait, was that a wolf? I knew I had to act fast. The wolves weren't aggressive, but they were big. To someone who didn't understand them, they might look terrifying. And if one of them got cornered, especially Ranger, it could go very, very wrong. I got dressed in a rush, loaded my gear into the car, gloves, tranquilizer kit, scent cloths, raw meat, and drove toward the areas where they'd been spotted. I called the local wildlife network and posted on social media. Karen, meanwhile, had already started spinning her version of the story. She told people I had faulty fencing, that I was hiding illegal animals, that I had endangered the community. But the video told a different story, and soon everyone had seen it. By noon, Blaze was back in the enclosure. A neighbor found her lying in their backyard and called me. She walked back home like she knew the way. An hour later, Luna was found near the school, but thankfully one of the teachers recognized her from a school safety event I'd once held. They calmly coaxed her with snacks until I arrived. Shadow was still missing, and Ranger, my sweet, scarred, terrified Ranger, was nowhere to be found. That afternoon, the HOA called for an emergency meeting. Karen showed up dressed like she was going to war. She had binders. She had notes. She had her lawyer cousin on a video call. She stood up in front of everyone and declared that I was a threat to the community, that I should be fined, removed, and possibly arrested. I stayed silent as she ranted. I let her have the spotlight. When she finished, I pulled out a USB and handed it to the committee chair. "Play this," I said. The video lit up the screen. Karen, the shears, the gate, the shadow. The room went silent. Karen turned pale. One of the board members muttered, "Oh my God." Someone else whispered, "She let them out." Another said, "We could have had a kid attack because of her." Karen tried to speak, tried to claim it was fake, but it was too late. The truth had a funny way of howling louder than her lies. And now, the hunt for Ranger had begun. The morning air was thick with tension. News vans had started to circle the neighborhood like vultures, their satellite dishes rotating like robotic heads searching for prey. Word had gotten out, not just to the local news stations, but beyond. HOA nightmare. Woman releases wolves into suburbia. That was the headline flashing across TV screens, paired with the grainy footage of Karen snipping the fence. I watched the segment play out from the corner of my living room while the phone rang nonstop. Reporters, neighbors, rescue groups, and even a zoo director were calling. Everyone wanted to know where Ranger was, and, more importantly, how a woman like Karen had gotten close enough to a wild animal enclosure to do this in the first place. Blaze and Luna were already recovering from their unexpected adventure, each resting in their enclosure with heavy breaths and darting eyes. Shadow had been spotted briefly in a neighbor's backyard before disappearing again into the woods that bordered the subdivision. But Ranger, there was no trace. No paw prints, no sightings, nothing. And with every hour that passed, my anxiety tightened like a noose. Ranger wasn't just another wolf. He was the one who needed safety the most. A single trigger could send him spiraling. Sirens, flashing lights, a loud voice. If someone cornered him or tried to trap him without knowing his history, it could end in tragedy. I spent the next few hours driving along the tree line, scanning for movement, calling out with the howl I had practiced over the years. Ranger used to respond. Now there was only silence. I stopped near the creek and laid down one of his scent cloths, something that carried my smell, his pack smell, and the scent of home. I left meat nearby, hoping to draw him in. It was all I could do for now. When I returned, my neighborhood was buzzing with more than just reporters. The HOA had called a second emergency meeting, and this time the entire street seemed to show up. Folding chairs were set up in the cul-de-sac. Karen stood at the front, still holding her clipboard like a weapon, but her posture had changed. Her usual smugness had cracked. She was still talking fast, trying to spin a new version of the story, this time claiming she was just checking for safety violations. She said she'd heard noises, thought a child might be inside the enclosure, and was acting as a good Samaritan. But people weren't buying it anymore. The video footage had been shared and reshared until even the local coffee shop baristas were talking about it. A few neighbors stood up to speak. One woman, Mrs. Thompson, who used to avoid me like I was contagious, said, "I may not be an animal person, but I know sabotage when I see it." Another man added, "She cut the fence. That's not a mistake. That's criminal." Karen tried to shout over them, claiming defamation, but it was clear her grip on the neighborhood was loosening. One board member even suggested calling an official vote to remove her from the HOA leadership position. While the meeting grew more chaotic, I got a text. It was from a boy I didn't expect, Karen's son. His message was simple. "I think I know where Ranger might be." My heart skipped. I texted back instantly, and we arranged to meet behind the tennis courts, away from the crowd. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder like he thought his mother might pop out of a bush. He was lanky, maybe 15 or 16, wearing a hoodie and clutching a water bottle. He didn't waste time. "I've seen him before, Ranger. You let me pet him once through the fence when my mom wasn't around." He paused. "I think I saw him last night by the old shed near the construction site." I didn't say anything because I was scared my mom would freak, but he looked like he was limping. I asked him why he was telling me this now. He hesitated, then said, Because she's gone too far. She's not okay. There was something fragile in his voice. I thanked him and promised not to mention his name. Before he left, he said something else. There's stuff in our garage. Files, letters. I think she was working with someone, a land developer. She didn't just hate your fence. She wanted that land cleared. The puzzle pieces started to fall into place. Karen didn't just despise my wolves out of fear or HOA pride. She had a motive, a deal, probably money involved. And if Ranger had wandered toward that construction site, he was in danger, not just from being found, but from being silenced. A wolf appearing on a potential development site could stall the whole project, and people like Karen didn't like delays. I called animal control and told them I had a lead. They agreed to send 2 officers with me, but warned that if Ranger appeared aggressive, they might have to tranquilize him on the spot. I agreed, but made them promise not to fire unless absolutely necessary. We loaded up and drove toward the edge of the neighborhood, where the empty lots and construction trailers stood silent under the sun. As we approached the shed, I noticed something on the ground, fresh tracks, deep and uneven. They led behind the building, where a small hill sloped into a thicket of trees. I walked ahead quietly, clutching the cloth I had worn for days to keep my scent strong. I didn't call out. I just waited. Then I heard it, a low whine. Ranger stepped out from behind a bush, his left hind leg lifted awkwardly, a gash visible along his thigh. His eyes locked onto mine, and I saw the recognition flicker, but there was also fear. Not of me, but of what had happened to him. He backed away, ears low, tail stiff. I crouched down and placed the cloth on the ground. I didn't move. I just whispered his name. It took 5 full minutes of stillness before Ranger limped forward and pressed his nose to the cloth. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just reached forward slowly and touched his fur, letting him know he was safe. Animal control helped me wrap his leg and lift him into the back of the van. The officers were quiet. One of them said, "That's the calmest I've ever seen a wolf rescue go." I smiled, exhausted. He's not just a wolf. He's mine. That night, the HOA chat exploded again. Karen had tried to call another meeting. This time, no one showed up. Someone even posted a screenshot of a petition to have her legally removed from the board. It had over 80 signatures. But I didn't care about the drama anymore. Not that night. That night, I sat beside the enclosure, watching Ranger sleep under the stars, his leg bandaged, his body finally at peace. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the kind to retreat quietly, and now that her secrets were starting to unravel, she'd become even more dangerous. The next morning brought a strange kind of silence. Not peaceful, not calm, just thick and waiting, like the quiet before a thunderstorm. Ranger was safe, his leg wrapped and his breathing steady, but the air around the neighborhood buzzed with an energy I couldn't ignore. I had barely poured my coffee when my phone began vibrating again. This time, it wasn't another concerned neighbor or wildlife rescue volunteer. It was a producer from a national news outlet. They had seen the footage. The story had gone viral overnight, not just local news anymore. People across the country were watching. The headline had evolved now. It read, "HOA Karen cut open wolf sanctuary fence, then sued the victim." And just like that, what had started as neighborhood gossip was now public spectacle. I declined the interview. I wasn't ready for lights and cameras. But I couldn't stop what was already in motion. A friend forwarded me a meme. Karen's face badly edited onto a wolf's body with the caption, "Alpha of the HOA pack." Thousands of shares. People were posting screenshots of the security footage, commenting on her arrogance, mocking her fake concern. It should have felt satisfying. It didn't. Because I knew people like Karen didn't crumble under public ridicule. They turned into something worse, something desperate. That same afternoon, I got served. A man in a brown blazer showed up on my porch with a legal envelope. Karen was suing me. The charges were laughable: emotional distress, property damage, false accusations, even defamation. She claimed my wolves had threatened her safety and that I had smeared her name with edited footage. She had also filed a formal complaint with the HOA demanding I be evicted from the community for endangering lives. My hands shook as I read the pages. She wasn't just lashing out. She was trying to destroy me legally, financially, publicly. But what Karen didn't know was that she had already left cracks behind. Her son had given me more than just Ranger's location. He had handed me a key, a literal one, a brass key that opened a locked filing cabinet in their garage. He had whispered the words quickly before leaving, something about land contracts, secret deals, hush money. At first, I wasn't sure what to do with it. I didn't want to drag her son deeper into the mess. But now, as I stared at the lawsuit in my hands, I knew I couldn't stay passive anymore. That evening, when Karen was busy yelling at a reporter on her front lawn, I slipped around the side of her house. Her garage was closed but not locked. I used the key on the cabinet, just like her son had instructed. Inside were folders, thick ones. I snapped photos of everything. Documents detailing land rezoning requests, letters from a real estate developer, and even copies of emails. Emails where Karen discussed the removal of unsightly barriers and a strategy to force relocation of non-compliant homeowners. I didn't know real estate law, but I knew blackmail when I saw it. I brought the files to my lawyer the next day. He flipped through the pages with growing interest, his eyebrows rising higher with each contract. He looked at me and said, "She's not just overstepping. She's been working with a development firm to clear property lines. If she got rid of you, they could reroute access to the greenbelt." It all clicked. Karen hadn't cared about the wolves. She had cared about the land behind my fence, undeveloped, quiet, and perfectly positioned for a backdoor road into a future housing project. Armed with this new information, we filed a counterclaim: false charges, tampering with private property, intentional release of wild animals. We submitted the security footage and the documents from her garage. My lawyer suggested we stay quiet for now, let her think she was winning. I agreed, though every minute of silence felt like nails under my skin. But it was a strategic pause because the moment of impact was coming. Meanwhile, the search for Shadow continued. Every day, I walked the neighborhood with scent cloths and treats, calling her name. It was during one of these walks that something unexpected happened. A group of neighbors stopped me, 3 people I barely knew. One handed me a flashlight, the other a map marked with potential hiding spots. The third simply said, "We want to help." I stared at them, confused. These were people who used to avoid eye contact, who once signed Karen's petition to have my fence shortened, and now they were helping me search for a wolf. The shift was slow but real. The neighborhood was starting to wake up. People realized Karen's obsession had crossed a line. They remembered how she yelled at kids for sidewalk chalk, how she once fined a man for painting his front door the wrong shade of brown. I wasn't the first target, just the one who fought back. On the third night, we finally found Shadow. She had taken refuge under a disused wooden platform near the old bike trail. She was trembling, dirty, but otherwise unharmed. I called softly, crouching nearby, and she crept out cautiously. When she saw a ranger's scent cloth, she let out a soft whimper and walked into my arms. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. I just wrapped my arms around her and whispered, "You're safe now." We brought her home, and the pack was whole again. Karen must have sensed the momentum shifting because the next morning she upped the stakes. She held a press conference in her front yard with cameras, microphones, and a prepared speech. She stood next to her lawyer, eyes red and voice shaking, as she claimed she was the real victim, that she was being harassed, that a wolf cult had invaded her life, that she feared for her safety. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so dangerously manipulative. What she didn't know was that one of her own neighbors had gone live on social media, streaming the whole spectacle and quietly narrating over it. This woman cut a fence, released wolves, and is now playing victim. Welcome to HOA hell. The video got thousands of views in minutes. Comments poured in. Donations to the rescue center started flowing. People began showing up, not to support Karen, but to support the wolves. And then came the real blow. The HOA board scheduled a public vote, an emergency session to decide whether Karen should remain in any position of influence. Flyers were posted, emails sent. The community had a decision to make, and for the first time in years, it wasn't Karen calling the shots. That night, as I sat in the enclosure watching the wolves rest together, I knew something had changed. The damage she caused couldn't be undone. Ranger still limped. Shadow still flinched at loud noises. But something else had been freed, not just the wolves, but the truth. And the truth had sharp teeth. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in mood. The walls were white and bare, the lights humming above like an impatient sigh. People filtered in slowly, filling the seats, some familiar from the neighborhood, others strangers drawn by curiosity. A few reporters sat near the back, quiet but alert, pens ready. I sat beside my lawyer, fingers clenched tight in my lap, trying to suppress the storm building in my chest. On the other side of the room sat Karen. She looked calm, too calm, dressed in a navy blue suit, lips pressed into a smirk like she already knew the outcome. She didn't glance at me once. Her lawyer, tall and stiff, kept flipping through his notes as if preparing for battle. The judge arrived, and the room shifted. Everyone straightened. This was real now. Karen's lawsuit was ridiculous on paper, but legally, it had traction. She claimed emotional distress, reputational harm, and negligence regarding wild animals. It was an attack dressed in legal terms, and now I had to defend not just myself but the wolves. My lawyer stood and opened our side with clarity and force. He laid out the timeline of events, submitted the video footage, explained the state-approved permits for the rescue enclosure, and showed the vet records for the injured wolf. The judge listened intently, expression unreadable. Then Karen's lawyer began. He painted a picture of a homeowner under siege, a woman frightened by the sound of howls in the night, a neighbor pushed to action by fear. He described the wolves as dangerous, unpredictable, and a threat to public safety. When he used the phrase potential child mauling, I almost stood up, but my lawyer placed a calming hand on my arm. I stayed seated. Then came the moment we had prepared for. My lawyer introduced the photos of the documents found in Karen's garage, the emails, the land contracts, the conversations with the developer. He explained how Karen had a financial incentive to eliminate obstacles like my fenced land and the protected green belt behind it. Her lawyer objected. The judge allowed it. The room grew tense. People began whispering. Karen's fingers twitched for the first time. Next, we called a witness. To my surprise, Karen's son had agreed to speak. He walked up to the stand, nervous but brave. He told the truth, that he had seen the wolves before and never felt threatened, that his mother had a long-standing grudge, that she had discussed getting rid of my enclosure multiple times. His voice cracked as he talked about the pressure at home, about the moments he felt trapped between loyalty and what was right. Karen didn't look at him once. When he stepped down, I felt the courtroom shift again. Sympathy, not for Karen, but for her son, and maybe, just maybe, for me. The final blow came when one of the HOA board members submitted a statement on behalf of the neighborhood. It detailed Karen's long history of aggressive HOA enforcement, personal vendettas, and past attempts to manipulate the board for her benefit. It included screenshots from the neighborhood chat, emails, and even a recording of her threatening another homeowner over a flower bed. The judge called a recess. Outside the courtroom, cameras waited. I kept my head down, shielding my face from questions. My lawyer whispered that things looked good, that we had likely done more than defend ourselves. We had dismantled her credibility completely. But I didn't let myself believe it yet. I had seen how quickly things could turn. I had seen what Karen was capable of when cornered. That night, a message came through the rescue center hotline. Someone had seen Ranger earlier that day, limping heavily and lying under a parked construction vehicle near the edge of the woods. I knew it was a mistake. Ranger was already home, healing. But it raised an alarm. What if there was another wolf? What if one had escaped notice during the panic? I rushed to the location with a flashlight, my heart pounding. When I arrived, I didn't find another wolf, but I did find something else. Hidden behind the construction trailer was a trap, metal teeth, rusty and illegal, half buried under leaves. Someone had set it recently. I took photos, called the authorities, and waited. I had no proof who had placed it, but the location spoke volumes, just beyond the reach of the neighborhood, just far enough for deniability. Animal control removed the trap the next morning. Word spread quickly. By the time the court reconvened, even the judge had heard about it. Though not part of the lawsuit, it added weight to our claims that someone had been actively targeting the wolves. My lawyer referenced the incident subtly during his closing argument, letting the image linger in the minds of everyone present. The judge took 2 more days to deliberate. In that time, the neighborhood held its vote. It wasn't close. Karen was officially removed from her HOA position. People began putting signs on their lawns, little ones with paw prints that read, "Protect the Pack." A local artist even painted a mural of the wolves on the community center wall. For the first time in years, people were talking to each other without fear, without Karen's shadow looming over every lawn inspection and mailbox complaint. When the ruling came in, I was sitting on my porch with Ranger beside me. The judge dismissed all of Karen's claims. He ruled in my favor on every count. She was fined for damages, for false reporting, and ordered to pay legal costs. More importantly, the court acknowledged the safety and legality of my rescue operations. It was over, or so I thought, because 2 nights later, I caught movement on the security camera again. Not Karen this time. A man dressed in dark clothes, peering over the rebuilt fence with a flashlight. He didn't cut anything. He just looked. Then he walked back to a black SUV and drove away. When I checked the plates, they came up unregistered. The developer. That's when I realized Karen had only been the front line, the loud, messy distraction. But someone else had been pulling the strings. And now that she was gone, they were ready to step in themselves. But this time, I wasn't scared. Because now the pack wasn't just inside the fence. The pack was the whole neighborhood. The story spread faster than anyone expected. By the end of the week, national news stations had picked it up. They aired everything, from the footage of Karen cutting the fence to the courtroom revelations, the hidden documents, and even the emotional return of the wolves. Interviews with neighbors, rescue volunteers, and even wildlife experts played back-to-back on morning shows. Karen's name became a hashtag. People online dubbed her the Wolf Releaser. Memes, parody videos, dramatic reenactments with sock puppets. Every angle was explored. And through it all, the wolves became something more than just misunderstood animals. They became a symbol. People latched on to the idea of a quiet, healing pack being threatened by cruelty and greed. And in defending them, the neighborhood found its voice. Karen disappeared from public view. Her house, once decorated with seasonal flags and neatly trimmed hedges, now looked abandoned. The porch light remained off. The shades were pulled tight. Her son, who had been the first to break the silence, stayed with his aunt 2 towns over. I never saw him again, but I heard through others that he was doing better, finally getting the space he needed away from all the noise. I hoped he would find peace, even if his mother never did. The developer that Karen had been working with didn't stay quiet for long. A week after the court case ended, I received a letter from their legal team, polite, formal, and cold. They claimed they had no knowledge of Karen's actions, that she had acted independently, and that they had terminated all dealings with her. But the last paragraph hinted at something else, a subtle suggestion that I consider alternative relocation options for the wolves in the future. It wasn't a threat, not on paper, but I felt it between the lines. That's when the neighborhood stepped in again. People who had once called the wolves a nuisance now built signs for their enclosure. Kids drew paw prints on the sidewalks with chalk. A group of volunteers helped me paint a mural on the outside wall of the rescue shelter, a vibrant image of the pack under moonlight, standing together. I didn't ask for any of it. They just did it. The same HOA that had once voted to fine me for having a compost bin now proposed a community grant to expand the sanctuary. Then the fundraiser began. It started with a small online campaign organized by a local teacher. She wrote a heartfelt post about Ranger, how he'd limped into her heart through the screen, and how his story made her rethink everything she thought she knew about wolves. Within days, thousands of people had donated. Celebrities shared the link. Wildlife organizations reached out, offering support, supplies, and collaboration. Someone even sent a custom-designed solar lighting system for the enclosure. A small company from Colorado shipped in a heated shelter pod for injured rescues. The support was overwhelming, humbling, and deeply needed. With the new funds, I expanded the fencing, reinforced the shelter, and finally purchased the mobile vet equipment I'd been saving up for. Now I could treat minor injuries without rushing to the nearest wildlife hospital. But it wasn't just about upgrades. It was about what the wolves represented now. They weren't just survivors. They were proof that standing up against injustice, no matter how loud, how cruel, or how well-connected, could still win. One afternoon, as I refilled the wolves' water troughs, I found a letter taped to the side of the gate. No return address, no signature, just a short note written in careful, neat handwriting. It read, "I still don't understand everything, but I understand you love them. And I understand what I did was wrong. I hope someday I can fix it." There was no name, but I knew who it was. For a moment, I stood there with the paper in my hand, not angry, not sad, just still. Maybe that was enough. Maybe silence was her way of surrender. In the months that followed, the wolves settled back into their routine. Ranger's limp improved. Luna grew closer to Shadow, and I often found them sleeping side by side. Blaze took over lookout duty, pacing the perimeter every night, ears sharp, always watching. The pack had changed, but they were still together. And so was the neighborhood. Every week, new volunteers came by. Some helped clean, others brought donations. A few just sat quietly outside the enclosure, listening to the sounds of breathing paws in the dirt, the occasional soft howl in the distance. People who had once been too busy or too scared were now the first to ask how they could help. A woman who once filed a complaint about barking now baked treats for the volunteers. The man who nearly voted for my eviction helped install the new solar panels. One evening, while the sun dipped low and painted the sky in burnt orange, a familiar voice called my name. It was the reporter from the original local station, the first one who covered the story before it exploded. She said they were doing a follow-up, wanted to know how everything ended. I told her the truth. It hadn't ended. It had evolved. The danger hadn't disappeared, not entirely. People like the developer didn't give up easily, but neither did we. And now, we weren't fighting alone. Before she left, she asked if I had any final message for the viewers. I looked at Ranger, who was lying in the shade with his eyes half closed, and then back at her. I said, sometimes the wildest things in life are the ones that teach us how to be human. The interview aired the next day, and at the end of the segment, as the credits rolled, a teaser flashed across the screen. It showed me answering a call on speaker, looking confused. A voice on the other end said, "We heard you work with wolves. How do you feel about mountain lions?" The screen faded to black, and the words appeared slowly, almost like a promise. To be continued. And somewhere, just beyond the tree line, a soft howl rose into the wind. Not a warning, not a cry, just a reminder that the wild is never far away, and neither is the fight to protect it.